The last few games finished up and people were preparing to leave, though it ended up being an extra hour before that happened. A few groups of people decided they wanted to have a match. In the meantime, some of the teachers were going out for lunch. They were going to treat anyone who tagged along. Iwaoi-chan convinced me to go and we followed close behind them along with several other students. I didn't realize how hungry bowling could make you. I feel like I've been starved for days. It makes it that much more pleasing when the mentioned diner comes into view. It was rather small, but there was definitely enough space to fit everyone who tagged along. All of us slowly poured through the glass door, taking out seats. Me and Iwaoi-chan were lucky enough to snag seats close to the window like we usually do. Since there were so many people here, it took a while for the waiters and waitresses to get to us. By then I had already decided what to order. I took advantage of this opportunity and got a nice slice of apple pie. It's been a while since I had the pleasure. Even though I'm very hungry, I prefer not to eat heavy meals after lunch, unless it's dinner. Iwaoi-chan ordered a burger and a side of fries. It sounded tasty as he mouthed it to the waitress that was currently taking our orders. "Any drinks?" she asked, writing down our orders on her clipboard. "I'll have a Coke," Iwaoi-chan said, relaxing into the back of his seat. She turned to look at me, waiting for my answer. Yes. I'll have a lemonade, if that's okay. Your meals will arrive shortly," she informs us before disappearing somewhere in the crowded room. Our drinks were delivered within a minute or two. Iwaoi-chan and I took a sip at the same time. I noticed the sudden frown appear on his face. "Tastes like shit," he mumbles, eyeing his cup. I found it a little humorous and smiled at him. "Mine was pretty good actually. Do you wanna share mine? It's pretty good," I ask, looking at him. A smirk crossed his face as he nodded. I couldn't help but to blush a little. Of course now I was tempted to taste his. He nodded when I asked him but warned me of its taste. I slowly lifted his cup to my lips and sipped the Coke. It tasted quite musty and warm. The taste made me very uncomfortable. It didn't even compare to the powerful feeling of sharing cups with Iwaoi-chan though, so I was able to shrug it off pretty easily. With the amount I've been blushing, I bet I look like a walking cherry. After waiting a few minutes, our food arrived. The slice of pie looked just as good as it did in the menu. The sweet creaminess of the pie lit my mouth. The tingles from the sugar caressed my tongue. The delicate crust melted in my mouth as I chewed. It was so delicious I smiled brightly. I held the back of my hand to my mouth, making sure none of it fell out. Iwaoi-chan sat there and watched me with an amused look on his face. Soon he was biting into his own meal. He finished before me, despite the size of his meal. I was just about done though. "Oi, give me a bite of that," he says, lifting his head. There was one good bite left, but I didn't mind letting him have it at all. I grinned and slid my plate over to him. He smiled before taking the last bite. "This makes that Coke taste like dishwater." I cracked another smile as he spoke. Soon enough everyone had finished their meals and it was time to head back to the park. After exiting the diner, the orange tint of the evening sky that covered the peaceful-looking town caught my eye. It was truly a sight, one that I wish I could have captured in a picture of something. The sun was just setting as we arrived back at Cabin Park. The trip back was a little boring cause someone snagged Iwaoi-chan's seat beside me before he could get there. He asked the person sitting there if he could swap seats, but she ignored him after a long blank stare. So I was left without any entertainment other than watching the day fade away from the windows of the bus. Today was exhausting, so as soon as I made it to the bedroom I fell face first onto my bed. The softness of the sheets mended my soreness. Today was a lot of fun. It feels amazing having a friend, especially someone like Iwaoi-chan. He's truly a good person. After a short nap I pulled out the book that I was reading earlier and continued where I left off. I placed myself in a whole other world as I pulled the words from the pages as my eyes trailed over them. "Hey, it's almost time for dinner. You wanna come?" Iwaoi-chan asks, popping his head halfway into the room. I plan on bringing it here cause I'm too tired to eat there, so if you don't wanna come I can pack you something. I'll come. I smile while setting down my book. I want to spend as much time around him as possible during this trip, cause I don't know how things'll be when I get back home. I don't even know if I'd be able to survive another day if my father found out where I was. I lifted myself from the bed and made my way to Iwa-chan's side. As we left the cabin I noticed it was still a little light outside despite the sun already setting. As we walked to the food hall we heard cheers, shouts and screams. It seems some of the students were partying. I most certainly didn't want to be a part of it, and from the looks of it Iwa-chan didn't seem to be interested either. It seemed like a lot of students were eating out tonight, cause when we arrived at the food hall it was almost empty. There were a few people scattered about but far less than usual. To my surprise there was still quite a selection of food to choose from. The things me and Iwa-chan chose were quite different. I got 2 dinner rolls, a box of stir-fried vegetable rice, and some salmon. Iwa-chan got a box of spaghetti with sauce, a chicken salad, and yogurt. We bagged the food and returned to the cabin. I sat on my bed and opened the brown bag. The room was quiet, aside from the sound of our crackling bags and the gentle breeze ruffling the leaves of the trees nearby. I pulled out the rice and unwrapped the fork that I got from the food hall. The first bite was satisfying. All of the sweet and salty vegetables melded with the rice made for an excellent dish. After a few more bites I looked up to Iwa-chan. He was taking all of the food from his bag and placing it on his bed. He caught my gaze. He nudged his head. "Come over here. I wanna try some of that." He spoke, then patted the spot next to him. I shyly stood from my bed and brought the bag with me. When I reached his bed I took a seat on the comfortable sheets, next to Iwa-chan. We were close enough to where I could feel the warmth coming from his body. Since he's a very active guy he produces more heat than the average person, or at least that's what I assume. He smirked at me before taking a bite of my stir-fried rice. I felt my cheeks heat up as we continued eating from the same box. With every bite it seemed as if the food tasted better. The box of stir-fried rice was gone quickly since we were both eating it. Iwa-chan popped out his box of spaghetti and took a bite. It looked so freaking good. I wanted to taste it but I didn't want to take his food. He turned to look at me with a questioning look on his face. "You aren't going to eat? You don't mind?" I questioned, looking up at him. "I just ate a ton of your rice, why would I keep this for myself?" He narrowed his eyes. "What kind of guy do you take me for?" I couldn't help but to break a smile. He returned it and nudged me in the arm. He returned it and nudged me in the arm. I slowly moved my fork to the box of spaghetti that sat on Iwa-chan's thigh. I took a little scoop and guided it to my mouth with my other hand under it, making sure it doesn't fall or drip. As the spaghetti sat on my tongue a powerful taste captured my mouth. "That's so freaking good," I muttered in shock as my body melted from the taste. Iwa-chan chuckled at my reaction, and went in for another bite. Soon enough we'd finished all the food. It was one of the best dinners I've ever had. I was certainly not expecting a meal like this. The food at the food hall is usually mediocre. "Well, I guess I should get this mess cleaned," Iwa-chan grumbled as he stood. "No, let me do this." I shook my head and smiled at him. He raised a brow, wearing a questioning look. "You sure?" "Yeah, I want to." "All right, well I'm off to shower," he announced, standing from the bed. I carefully stacked all of the boxes and sat them inside the empty brown bags. I folded them and placed them in the trash bin near the kitchen. I returned to the room and decided to make up Iwa-chan's bed. The sheets were scrunched up and all over the place. As I was getting out a change of clothes Iwa-chan came in from his shower. Blood rushed through my body like a bullet as Iwa-chan stood in the middle of the room in nothing but a pair of boxers. "You cleaned up nicely. I wasn't expecting this." Iwa-chan chuckled while looking over his bed. I bet I was cherry red at that point. I'm going to shower now," I mutter and scurry off to the bathroom in a quick motion. I literally gasped for air as I shut the door behind me. I honestly don't know why I get excited even though I know nothing can ever happen between us, since he's straight and all. Thinking that with every passing day hurts more and more. My feelings for him keeps growing endlessly, even when I tell myself nothing can happen. Just one glance from him is all it takes for me to be sent over the edge. I decide to just get in the shower and bury my thoughts. I let the hot water trail across my face and down my body, easing myself. The shower was a quick distraction, but the thoughts began to resurface when I stepped out. I sighed and started dressing myself. My face heated up when I realized I brought shorts. I wasn't expecting Iwaoi-chan to sleep in his boxers, so I planned on wearing a pair of shorts to bed. Earlier I rushed off to the bathroom too quickly to remember that. I sighed once more and finished dressing myself. I hesitantly returned to the room and saw Iwaoi-chan leaning against the window on his phone. He stood up as he heard my footsteps, with his eyes still on his phone. "You heading to bed?" he asked as he finally removed his eyes from his phone. I couldn't reply as he silently scanned my appearance from head to toe. After a moment he set his eyes on mine. I got lost in his. They were so deep and beautiful, they captured mine, until I realized he asked me a question. I'm heading to bed whenever you are," I answered, getting a hold of myself. "Well, in that case," he said before leaping onto his bed, back first. I smiled at him as he got under the cover. "Shoot, I forgot the light, can you shut it out?" he asked, lying sideways and facing towards me. "Yeah, sure," I replied, still feeling red. I did as he asked and made my way to the bed. "You don't mind me sleeping in my boxers, do you?" he asked, wearing a curious expression. Like I said before, who am I to deny him what he wants, especially since I'm the one sleeping on his bed. I definitely didn't mind him wearing boxers though. It could be a problem for me though. "No, plus, this is your bed, so it shouldn't matter what I think." "It matters to me," he said, lifting the cover. A shy smile captured my appearance. He really is the best person ever. I crawled in next to him and he lowered the cover. I was almost immediately warmed as the cover landed on me. All of Iwaoi-chan's exposed skin was the obvious culprit. I wanted to snuggle against him and feed directly from the heat source, but of course I couldn't. My heart raced as I tried falling asleep. I couldn't believe the situation I was in. Anyone in their right mind would take advantage of it, but me. I just couldn't. Plus, what I've gotten from him so far was already more than enough. I could accept being friends, as it's better than being alone. These were the thoughts running around in my head before I managed to doze off. Sometime during the night I felt Iwaoi-chan shift. He removed the little distance between us. He wrapped me in his arm and pulled my small body into his, suddenly wrapping me in a world of comfortable warmth. His knee hugged my knee pit, meaning our bare legs were touching. The hair on his legs tickled my hairless ones as they brushed against it. His legs also produced quite a bit of heat. I felt like I was being wrapped in a blanket that just came out of the dryer. This dream felt so comfortable, so real. To my surprise, it was indeed real as I woke in the morning still wrapped in Iwaoi-chan's arm. A smile broke at my lips as I heard his soft snores. I quickly relaxed in his arms from his breathing. I could feel his body grow and sink as he breathed in and out. This made me feel like the small being I was in comparison to him. Even though I was relaxed, I didn't fall asleep. I sat there lost in my head, like I usually am. I quickly jumped when I felt Iwaoi-chan's hand trail up my side, then tickled me. I was in a state of constant giggles as Iwaoi-chan held me down and tickled me lifeless. "Morning," he huffed, laying back on his bed. "Good morning, Iwaoi-chan," I spoke, as I turned to look at him. I was a little embarrassed as I was so close to him while he was still wearing nothing but boxers, but I was still smiling like an idiot. He looked down at me with his arms behind his head. It was probably obvious at how my face reddened when I scanned his appearance. The small patch of hair under his arm, his solid chest, his tight abs, just everything got me. He smiled at me and suddenly captured me in a headlock, making me redder. After much struggling and giggling, he finally released me. We fell back onto his bed once again, and this time I fell partially draped over his chest. As my laughter calmed, I realized the situation and pulled back, totally flustered. I apologized as I sat on my knees. He looked confused and raised a brow. I quickly got up from the bed and headed to the bathroom. It took me a while to regain my composure. I brushed my teeth and used the toilet before returning to the room. Iwaoi-chan made the bed and got out his phone while he waited for me to be done. "Sorry for taking so long," I apologized, scratching my arm shyly. "It's fine. I take quite a bit of time myself." He got out a pair of pants and a shirt before disappearing into the bathroom. I stood there pondering what to do for a moment. I just decided to read as I usually do, though. Just as I sat down, I heard the front door open. Footsteps trailed to the room and I anxiously watched the door, waiting to see who it was. It was one of the teachers. "Good morning," she started. I greeted her and she continued. "Today is our last full day here, so it would probably be a good time to start packing." She finished, then scanned the room. "Where are your roommates?" she asked, turning to face me once more. "Me and Iwaoi-chan are the odd ones out here, as we are the only two people sharing a cabin." I only have one, and he's in the bathroom," I replied, pointing towards the door behind her. She mouthed a silent "oh," then spoke. "Please tell him that I suggest he begin packing." I nodded as she finished. She gave me a little smile and told me she had to go inform the other students. When she left, I opened a book and began reading through it. I didn't notice Iwaoi-chan return to the room. The thing that caught my attention was the sound of pouring rain. If I recall, this is the only day it rained during the trip. I was surprised to see Iwaoi-chan standing next to his bed when I lifted my head. "Hey, I'm going to make us something to eat," he announced, turning to me. It was pouring outside, so there was no way we'd be making it out for breakfast. I smiled at him before he walked off into the kitchen. I really did appreciate everything he did for me. This trip would have been much less enjoyable if I'd been bunked with anyone else. I reopened my book and continued where I left off. A wonderful aroma captured the room, and my attention. I shut my book and stood from my bed to head into the kitchen. Iwaoi-chan was making pancakes. He saw as I walked in and gave me a little smile. "I'm making pancakes, but I don't think there's any syrup." He looked a little disappointed. "Well, that's unfortunate." I chuckled. He looked at me over his shoulder and scoffed jokingly. "There is sugar in this kitchen, right?" I asked with an idea popping into my head. "Yeah, why?" He gave me a questioning look. "What if you melted some in a pot with fruit or something? Maybe as a syrup?" I propose. I'm no cook, so I have no idea if this'll actually work. I did read somewhere that this is how many people make jam though. "That would work," he replies after thinking it over for a moment. "Can you check and see if there are any type of berries in the fridge?" he asked, focusing on the pancakes. I can't take my attention away from this at the moment. "Sure," I replied, gladly. If I could be of any use to him, it would make me happy. I walked over to the fridge and popped the door open. I scanned the contents of it and spotted a small bag of strawberries. Not the most exciting type of berry, but still very delicious. I sat them on the counter next to the stove, catching Iwaoi-chan's attention. "Nice, thank you," he said, making me smile. He poured a fresh round of batter in the pan and got out a small metal bowl. "I guess this'll have to do," he sighed, emptying the berries in the bowl. After he finished placing everything in, he sat it on the stove. A while later he finished up the pancakes. "Shit, I think I made too much," he spoke in a hushed voice. I never was good at measuring. I hadn't even realized I'd been watching him the whole time until he spoke to me. "See something you like?" he teased. My face flushed unexpectedly as I was not prepared for the question. I see something I like, but I'm not going to say it out loud. Besides, The question was probably a joke anyway. I ended up not saying anything. I got so lost in thought I forgot to respond. He just shot me a smirk. A sweet smell snapped me out of my daze. Well, the jam is finally done, Iwaoi-chan announced, with a relieved sigh. He got out 2 plates from the cupboard and placed them on both ends of the table. He put the pancakes at the center and the jam off to the side. Help yourself, he said, gesturing to the large plate of pancakes. My eyes grew when I saw him fork 3 large pancakes onto his plate. I could only imagine fitting one on my plate. While the jam was still hot, we poured it over the delicious-looking pancakes. My first bite out of it was amazing. It was very light and fluffy. It almost melted on my tongue. The strawberry jam works well with the pancakes as well. It tasted almost as good as the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches my grandma used to make me, and trust me, they were good. This is really good, I said, looking up at Iwaoi-chan while taking a forkful of my pancake. A smile crept at his lips. After breakfast I cleaned the kitchen and returned to the bedroom. Iwaoi-chan had his phone out, scrolling through something I couldn't make out. I sat on my bed and watched as he dug through his bag. He pulled out a cord and studied it for a moment before plugging it into the small radio in the corner. I hadn't noticed it sitting there until now. Music suddenly escaped from the speakers of the radio. The song and the sound of the pouring rain set a relaxing atmosphere in the room. I pulled out a book and read, listening to the song that calmed the room. Iwaoi-chan sat on his bed and continued scrolling through his phone. The rain picked up quite a bit from earlier this morning. Outside was cast in a dim gray lighting, making the house feel more cozy. After a moment he looked up and spoke. I hope this doesn't bother you. I shook my head with a small half smile. He returned it before looking back to his phone. After around an hour of reading I began getting sleepy. The playlist Iwaoi-chan put together, all of it was very calming. I just couldn't force myself to keep my eyes open any longer. I shut my book and hesitantly made my way up to Iwaoi-chan's bed. He lifted his head and we locked our gazes. Is something wrong? He asked with a curious expression. No. I was just wondering if you'd mind me taking a nap, I questioned quietly, pointing to his bed. No, not at all, he replied simply, giving me space to get in. Actually, I think I'll join you, he said while setting down his phone. My face heated immediately upon hearing that. If that's okay with you, he questioned while lowering his head, checking my facial expression. Of course. This is your bed after all. You're right. Now get in. Iwaoi-chan stretched back and relaxed into the bed. I slowly placed myself next to him, getting comfortable in the soft covers and sheets. The sound of the rain put me to sleep in a matter of minutes. The soft echoing of the raindrops hitting the ground, running on the tree leaves and tapping the roof, this felt very cozy. It reminded me of when I was younger. I'd always get excited at the sound of the rain. It always made me feel comfortable. It's out there and I'm in here. Those were my innocent thoughts as a child. During rainy days my mother would make us cups of hot cocoa and we would all sit on the couch and watch a movie. It was one of the best feelings in the world. Some would say sleeping the last day of such an amazing trip would be a waste, but my original purpose was to come here and relax. I couldn't ask for anything more than to spend the last day relaxing in bed, with Iwaoi-chan. The sound of the growing rain woke Iwaoi-chan and I up at the same time. I looked up to see him smiling down at me with his charming sleepy face. It's really pouring now, Iwaoi-chan muttered, leaning up on the bed. Thankfully this time I hadn't clung to him. Though I was practically melded to his side. I wasn't ready to get out of bed. Iwaoi-chan noticed and poked my side. I curled up in self-defense but he continued to poke me, so I clocked him with his pillow. His reaction was enough reason for me to get out of bed. I quickly distanced myself from him, knowing what I had in store. Here we go again, Iwaoi-chan sighed with a devious smirk. And no, I didn't mean to. I waved my hands, prepared to make a run for it. He slowly stood from the bed, making me nervous. I decided to take off before he made the first move. I ran out of the bedroom and ignored Iwa-chan's calls. I practically trapped myself by entering the kitchen. It was small and the exit wasn't that big, not for Iwa-chan at least, so he could easily catch me. His look grew more devious when he saw that I was trapped in the kitchen. He slowly approached me, making sure I wouldn't run off again. My only option was to get over the table. After a moment of hesitation, that's what I did. I jumped onto a chair and hopped onto the table. I quickly slid off and ran back to the bedroom before Iwa-chan could reach me. I darted to the end of the room, so if he caught me I'd have two ways to escape. He stood at the door frame still with that devious look on his face. He slowly began approaching, so I readied myself to make a break for it. I was already getting exhausted from laughing the whole time. He didn't even touch me yet and I am almost laughing tears. He suddenly lunged forward at me. I took a sharp left and ran across my bed, making my way to the exit. When I got to the hall I realized I had no plan for where I'd go next. Iwa-chan was right on my tail, so I had very little time to decide. My only logical option would be to run outside, even though it was still pouring. So that's what I did. I darted for the door on my right and charged outside. The deck had a cover over it, so I didn't get wet immediately. It was only when I ran down the small set of stairs that I started getting drenched. The drops were so large it barely took any time for our clothes to get soaked. I hadn't put my shoes on before leaving the cabin, so my socks are also wet. I was suddenly regretting my decision. Like usual I got tired and Iwa-chan caught up with me. He tackled me to the rain-drenched grass. It wasn't like our clothes could get any wetter though. He pinned me under him and tickled me senseless. I pleaded but he ignored my surrender. I felt so weak and helpless as he drained the little energy I had left. Laughter escaped me the whole time. Iwa-chan was also laughing. His laugh was the best I'd ever heard. It wasn't loud or rough, it was more like a deep chuckle. It suited his handsome appearance perfectly. After he finished tickling the soul out of my body I laid exhausted in the wet grass. I didn't have enough energy to stand. Luckily he extended a hand. I gratefully accepted it and was pulled to my feet. He held my shoulder, supporting me as we headed back to the cabin. I win again. Iwa-chan spoke, grinning smugly as we entered the bedroom. I pouted at him but couldn't hold back a smile. Of course I lost. I retorted, accepting defeat. I could never win against him. He's superior in every way. We'd better get these soaked clothes off before we catch a cold. I nodded and got out a change of clothes. When I turned around Iwa-chan had already begun to undress. I was shocked, cause I had expected him to change in the bathroom. I stood there and watched like a deer in the headlights. I couldn't avert my gaze. He peeled the wet shirt off his toned body and lifted it over his head. The rain slightly altered his appearance, wetting his hair. He still looked very handsome, if not more so than before. He did a slight hair flip, shaking the water out. Suddenly he looked over to me with a look of curiosity. Something wrong? He asked, raising a brow. I bet I was 50 shades of red when I realized I'd been staring, and worse, I'd been caught doing it. No, I was just about to change. I shake my head furiously. I felt a little embarrassed that I had to use the bathroom to dress myself, but I had a good reason for it. I was not about to let him see the scars and bruises all over my body. I mean, I can probably trust him, but I'm ashamed. And I don't want him to pity me. Things are going perfectly, and I don't want to push anything off course by dropping more of my problems on him. I grabbed my clothes and headed for the bathroom. Once in I streaked the wet clothes that stuck to my body. I threw on a sky blue t-shirt, that may or may not have an alien on it, and a pair of dark blue skinny jeans. You're not comfortable undressing around me? Iwa-chan asked me with a smirk, as I entered the room. Well. I began, scratching my arm. I'm not used to undressing around other people. It wasn't a lie, I'm really not used to undressing around people. However, if it weren't for these bruises, I would have followed behind Iwa-chan and just dressed myself in the room. I see, he replied, still smirking. I sat on my bed and pulled out a book, immersing myself in the pages. I noticed the rain had died down a little since earlier. It was still coming down, just a lot calmer. The time was currently 5 p.m. Iwa-chan was on his phone, and like I mentioned earlier, I was reading. We did just that for the next hour. We ran through the gentle rain, making sure not to get wet since we'd just changed. We rushed through the door of the food hall, escaping the rain. We only managed to get a few drops on us by hiding under anything we could find. It made me feel like I was some kind of spy on a secret mission. I was having a lot of fun, even though it wasn't intended. The smell of the freshly cooked food was so inviting as the doors parted. Mission success, I thought to myself, giggling a little. We got our trays and stacked them with macaroni and cheese. It tasted pretty good. I stuffed my cheeks with it, as I was starving. It ended up being hard to chew through, and I laughed while doing so, which only made it that much harder to finish. Iwa-chan just watched with amusement on his face. Once I shoved all of the macaroni and cheese down, I went onto my fruit salad. The meal was satisfying, aside from the shabby ingredients they used in the macaroni and cheese. Before we left, Shohei came up to our table and we chatted a while. Since it was our last day here, he wanted to catch up. I hope he continues being my friend when we get back. He invited us to a final day party that was being held in one of the cabins on the campground. We both declined. I'm really uncomfortable being around large crowds and loud noises. Shohei looked a little disappointed but accepted it. He rejoined his group of friends after talking to us a while longer. When we returned to the cabin, I asked Iwa-chan why he turned down the party invitation. I'm tired of parties, he sighed, heading into the bedroom. I can understand, he's one of the popular students, so I bet he gets invited to many. Plus you weren't going to be there, he added with a smirk, before disappearing through the door. I felt my redden. Was he serious? When I entered the bedroom, I spotted him packing. Shoot, I'd totally forgotten about that. I packed all my loose clothes and books in my bag. I'm going to miss this. Iwa-chan spoke softly. I turned my head for our gaze to meet. Yeah, me too, I replied quietly, wearing a sad smile. Both Iwa-chan and I skipped the shower since we were soaked by the rain and we had already changed. Iwa-chan shut out the light and hopped in the corner of the bed. I crawled in next to him. He lifted the cover and threw it over me. I always loved the feeling of being covered by someone. It just feels relaxing, I guess would be the best word to describe it. We both stayed awake for a while after getting to bed. Iwa-chan, are you awake? I whispered quietly, after hearing him shuffling in the covers. Yeah, I'm awake, what's up? Oh, I just wanted to know if you were awake. Of course that wasn't the only reason I called him. I wanted to talk to him, but I didn't want to keep him up. I can't fall asleep. Same. So what's on your mind? He asked quietly, moving closer to me so he doesn't have to raise his voice. I'm not ready to go back. If my father found out that I'm gone, then my life will be hell when I get back. I didn't tell this to Iwa-chan though. Yeah, it's the same for me. My friends won't give me a break when I get back. I really enjoyed my time here. I dunno how this trip would have gone if I were bunked with anyone else. I muttered sleepily. I guess my tiredness is finally starting to kick in. I feel the same way about you, Iwa-chan whispered before going silent. Both of us calmly drifted off to sleep. I felt content falling asleep after our short conversation. It made me overjoyed that he felt the same way I did. I'm happy I didn't end up being a burden. It was a good feeling to know that for once I wasn't causing anyone problems. When morning came, I woke with the top half of my body sprawled on top of Iwa-chan's, and his arms wrapped around me. Crap, we totally went all out this time. I slowly pulled myself up off Iwa-chan, then he let out a tired groan with his eyes popping open moments later. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I apologized, red-faced. I didn't want him to catch us in this position. Luckily I managed to pull away before he noticed. It's okay. He responded in a gentle, sleepy voice as he leaned up in bed. After dreadfully pulling myself out of bed, I was the first in the bathroom. I brushed my teeth, washed my sleepy face and headed back to the room. I stuffed my toothbrush in my bag since we were heading home today. I felt my nerves getting the best of me. My mind was lost in what if. What if my father finds out I've been gone the whole time? What if I don't actually keep any of my friends? What if Iwaoi-chan ignores me in school? There were so many questions spiraling in my mind. On my way to breakfast with Iwaoi-chan, we ran into an instructor. He informed us that we had to be ready to head out by 12 in the afternoon. Iwaoi-chan and I had already packed, so that wouldn't be much of a problem. One thing that was hard to prepare though was my soul. I wasn't quite ready to pack that up yet. When we got inside, the place was packed. I guess everyone is here for one last meal before going home. Iwaoi-chan got turkey bacon, eggs, and toast while I settled for pancakes and ice cream. I've been craving them since Iwaoi-chan made them. They were so fluffy and delicious. Iwaoi-chan bought us drinks as well. He got coffee and I got hot chocolate. It was an odd mix with ice cream and pancakes, but it looked so irresistible. When Iwaoi-chan and I finished up our breakfast, he took me on a walk around the park one last time. It was a shame that I didn't get to see little Iwaoi-chan one last time, but I didn't expect to. We got to the clearing where I found him, but this time we went a little further since it was earlier in the day. The place was so amazing with all of the bright green trees. I wandered around with my gaze in the sky. The place was so vast and beautiful. It made me very warm and happy. Being here with Iwaoi-chan made it that much better. Whoa! I breathed in awe with my sight still on the bright blue sky. This place is nice, isn't it? Iwaoi-chan chuckled, making me turn my gaze to him. It's far beyond nice. Just look at those trees, I said excitedly, pointing over to the thin white and green trees swaying in the wind. He chuckled and watched as I lost myself in nature. It was such an amazing experience for me. We scaled the beach a couple times and explored the park's center. The stone fountain was amazing. This took a couple hours of our time, and it was just about time to leave. Well, not just about, we still had an hour left. We didn't want to be late, so we headed back to the cabin. I double-checked to see if I had packed all my things. I did. I dragged my heavy bag out onto the front porch of our cabin. I sat on the stairs leading up to it, preparing to leave. Iwaoi-chan joined me a few minutes later. He placed one of his earphones in my ear and we listened to one of his playlists. I shot him a shy half smile and he gave a handsome warm one back.